Okay, good morning. This is the Retail Committee for June 18th, 2025. Can you take roll?
Chair Rectal,
Here.
Councilmember Lithcott-Hames,
Here.
Councilmember Burt.
Here.
For the record, 3 are present.
Okay, first on the agenda is public comment. This is for things that are not on the agenda, but under the purview of this committee. Do we have hands raised?
I've received no request to speak.
Okay, very good. Move on to the first action item, Economic Development Activity Report and Review of Sewer Use and Stormwater Ordinance.
Thank you, Chair. We have our team from Public Works to present on the stormwater ordinance.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Karen North. I'm the Assistant Public Works Director overseeing environmental services. I'm here with my team, Julie Weiss. She's our Watershed Protection Manager, and Gaba Stauffer. She is our Fats, Oils, and Grease Inspector. I just want to give you a little introduction. So we are here, we're talking about the City of Palo ordinance to update our food facilities. But we're also, when we come back to council in August, we're also actually updating 4 ordinances, which I just want to give you a little bit of context. So there's the sewer use ordinance, which you'll see, which has been a historic one for our pretreatment, which I thought I wanted to give a little context for Councilmember Burt, since he probably was regulated under that. And then we're going to have our stormwater ordinance, which to streamline it with our the stormwater municipal regional permit. And then we're going to create a fats, oils, and grease ordinance. So that way it will be easier for restaurants to understand. And then also a hauled waste ordinance, so for septic haulers. So we're creating 2 new ordinances just to give you context when we do come back to council. So,
and the 2 new ones are the fog,
fats, oils, and grease, and our septic hauling ordinance. And what currently our sewer use ordinance, our sewer use ordinance had storm and sewer, and then we also had storm. And so we're separating out the storm into one. So we're just doing a lot of cleanup, just so you understand what we're doing when we come back to council in August. But today we're really just focusing on 2 of those chapters of the ordinance, is the one for the fats, oils, and grease and stormwater, because that's really what impacts retailers. And so I wanted to kick off the meeting, and I'm going to turn it over to Julie and Gaba.
All right, great. Next slide, please. Okay, a little bit more about us before we start, so you know who we are and what it is we do. We are staff from Public Works, Environmental Services, Watershed Protection, and our mission is to keep water pollution out of creeks in San Francisco Bay. And we do that by working closely with businesses, industry, residents, and to a large extent our own operations to make sure that we are compliant with these regional ordinances, the stormwater ordinance and wastewater ordinances. So again, we are guided, our checklist of expectations for ourselves and the community is set forth in these regional permits, and we codify those requirements in our municipal code. And that's what allows us to enforce those requirements. And about every 5 or 10 years or so, we come back to you and say we need to update our ordinance so that it aligns with these regional permits. And that is part of what our effort is about today. So next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so if you don't take away anything else, this is the go-to slide for this presentation, and all the subsequent slides just further inform with a little bit more detail about these main requirements for restaurants, and then another one for all businesses. So restaurants under our new stormwater ordinance are going to need to comply with new standards for grease control devices if they are a new restaurant, if they're doing a remodel, or if their current grease control device no longer works. If a restaurant doesn't meet any of those requirements right there, if they're not doing those things, then they don't have any further action items after that. One new item that all restaurants are going to need to comply with is a requirement for secondary containment for waste fryer oil. Think about like if you're a restaurant that makes a lot of French fries or deep fried food, you need to store that waste oil somewhere. It's usually in the back, in the alley next to garbage and recycling. And we're going to require secondary containment so that oil spills don't make their way into storm drains, and also to address community concerns about cleanliness in those areas. And Gabby will go into that a little bit more. The next takeaway for all businesses is that all businesses are still going to be expected to be part of keeping pollution out of our watershed. There will be ongoing best management practices. Most of our businesses already get inspected, and most of them do a great job at this. So that will be a continued requirement. One interesting new requirement, though, is that for businesses that have on-site storm drains on their property, we'll have some new trash control requirements. We'll talk about that in a moment. So when we are speaking with with restaurants and with businesses, this is the information that we give them where they can go for more information. These are the highlights of the requirements, but if anyone wants to get into the weeds on it, we have a red line of the ordinance. We have past recordings of our specific community presentations. We have summary tables. So any level of detail people want, they can get it. It's right there on our website. So next slide, please. So we have been doing quite a bit of outreach in regard to all of our ordinance updates, and some of our restaurants have already said that they have heard about some of these changes. We have sent and emailed and personally delivered. GABA has personally gone door to door to a number of these restaurants to make sure that they know about these coming changes. And of course, the usual public meetings and putting information on our website. So we have really done what we can to meet restaurants and businesses where they're at, because we know they are busy running their business. They are running their restaurant. So we are doing what we can to meet them where they're at to make sure they know about these coming changes. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Gabby now.
All right, thank you. So as Julie mentioned, my name is Gabby Stoffer. I'm the Fat, Soil, and Grease Inspector. And like she said, I go around to all the restaurants and food facilities. So things that you don't typically think of, like maybe religious institutions that serve to the public, coffee shops, things like that. And I inspect. So I just want to give a brief background on what FOG is so that we're all on the same page. And then again, a high flyover of the new requirements. As Julie mentioned, we have a website that really has all of the detail and has a recorded public meeting that goes into a lot more detail. Okay, so what is FOG? How does it get into our sanitary sewer system? So FOG's an acronym for fats, oil, and grease, and it's primarily the byproduct of cooking and food preparation. So it can come from meat drippings, lard, salad dressing, even some sources like dairy that you wouldn't expect. And so these sources are then transferred from pots, pans, maybe your mop bucket if you had a spill on the floor, and they make their way into sinks and drains, and that then goes into our sanitary sewer system. And so food facilities and restaurants are a major source of FOG. And so one way that we stop FOG from entering the sanitary sewer system is by requiring grease control devices. You might also hear it called a grease interceptor or a grease trap. And their primary function is just to capture that FOG and some solid bypass, have it hauled off, and then that keeps it from bypassing both into the business's drainage system and then our city right of way too. So that's grease control devices. And then Julie also mentioned the waste oil, the fryer oil. And so that's another way that it can make its way into both the sanitary system and the storm drain system. And you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so why do we care and how do we manage it? So we care, I guess, first and foremost for the businesses. The FOG can really cause backups. It can corrode pipes. It's a very corrosive material when it sits for a while. And it can interrupt business by, causing those backups. You might have your toilets overflow. You have to call the plumber. It smells bad. You don't want to experience that. And so we're trying to help in mitigating that. Again, if it makes its way out into the city right of way through a sanitary sewer overflow, or if those waste oil bins have drippings, it can be a public health problem and a public nuisance, and it can also attract rodents. And so, again, we're trying to address those issues and some concerns of the businesses and residents regarding that. And then bigger picture, those sanitary sewer overflows, they can make their way into our storm drain system, which goes untreated to our creeks and bay and can, cause damage to aquatic life if not managed. And then again, we have Bay Area regional stormwater and wastewater permits that we have to comply with as well. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to briefly go over some major changes. There's also some minor changes. Everything can be found again at that website, and there'll be a QR code link as well for that. So one of the major changes will be the actual grease control device, the grease interceptor specifications. So the first one being the construction material of those devices themselves. I mentioned before that it's a very corrosive environment. So we want them to now be constructed of things like polyplastic, fiberglass, corrosion resistant materials. And that's for the lifespan of the businesses, units themselves, and also so that we don't have any bypass. The sizing, we want to now take into account the type of cuisine, how many meals you serve, because that affects the output of your fog. And then we're adding more connected fixtures because we know through inspections, and I worked in restaurants for a long time, sometimes the hand sink isn't always used for washing hands. Sometimes the prep sink that's just for washing lettuce has meat thawing in it. So better to just have most of the fixtures in the kitchen, the prep, and some of the service area just connected. And then Julie had mentioned the waste fryer oil secondary containment. So that's going to be applicable to all restaurants. And I have an extra slide on that in just a few minutes. So we'll go over that in just a minute. And so we realize that some of these specifications will be harder for certain restaurants. Each place has different needs. And so we have developed an alternate means and methods section where we're just coming up with alternate compliance options and trying to get creative and think outside the box and help businesses come into compliance with these new requirements. And can you go to the next slide? Okay, so who will this affect? So some of these are obvious. A restaurant that's new, it doesn't have a grease control device, they're going to have to follow all of these new requirements. If there's a kitchen remodel, if you're expanding, you're taking over the extra space, maybe you're adding a bar that has a service area, you're serving food there, that may trigger some of the new requirements. If your grease control device isn't operating properly, we see holes in these things, we see missing parts, things just aren't repairable, then you may be subject to change for that. Or if you're consistently contributing to backups in either your own building or the street itself, the city right of way. But as Julie mentioned, if none of these things apply to you, then you likely will not be affected by any of these changes. We can go to the next slide. So this is about secondary requirements for those waste oil fryer oil bins that are stored outside. We have a proposed effective date of January 1st, 2026. We've partnered with the fire department. They have some of their own concerns, and we have our stormwater concerns and public health concerns. And so we would like for these bins to be stored in some kind of secondary containment. We understand that there's space restrictions in a lot of these areas, so we're going to do a lot of outreach. I've been researching a lot of different types of containment and still working with the fire department to sort of get the details on what is acceptable as secondary containment. And we're finding, or what I'm finding from my research, is that typically it's going to cost in the $1,000 range. It could be a little less, could be a little bit more, but that's about the range that we're finding. And again, we're trying to address concerns from residents and from other businesses about you've all seen the back alleys at some of these places. They can be very messy. It attracts rodents. And so we're trying to address those concerns while also addressing fire, addressing their concerns, and we're addressing our stormwater concerns as well. And so you can see some of the requirements. We want them to be locked, labeled, covered, all of those things. And we're going to collaborate again with businesses to make sure that we can come into compliance. So I think that covers most of the fog. So I'm going to pass it back to Julie for the stormwater update.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, we have a regional stormwater permit that we have to comply with, and it's not just us, it's 76 other public agencies all around San Francisco Bay that have the same requirements for compliance to protect our watershed, San Francisco Bay. Really, one of the more interesting aspects of this new permit is that properties, as I mentioned before, that have a storm drain on site are required to prevent trash from entering the city's storm drain system. And they can do that by regular upkeep, by going out there maybe every day, making sure there's no debris that's in there. Or they can also put a trash capture device in that storm drain. If you think of like a colander or a little basket, that's what a trash capture device is. The water can go through, but it captures debris, which can be disposed of later. We know where a lot of these on-site storm drains are because of field work that we've done, and we already have plans to reach out to businesses when the ordinance is adopted to make sure they know about these requirements. We did a lot of extensive field work to try to identify many of these locations, but we've got some more work to do there. Another new interesting aspect of this permit is new requirements for mobile businesses. If you think about things like carpet cleaners or pressure washers, that type of businesses, they are also going to be looked to help prevent water pollution in our creeks and bay by capturing water so it doesn't go down our storm drains. So in addition, so they have a whole new set of best management practices, BMPs. And then in addition, any business that hires a mobile business also has some shared responsibility. If that business leaves and there's debris or sets behind, they also have a responsibility to get in contact with that business and say, hey, your job's not done here, get back here. So new requirements for mobile businesses. And then ongoing best management practices. We've revised our BMPs. They're on our website. They're short, sweet, very targeted for specific businesses. If you go to the next slide, I could show that what that looks like for you. And as I mentioned before, our businesses in Palo Alto are typically really good about complying with best management practices. We see that pretty consistently. We have to help folks out every now and then, but overall, we're usually in pretty good shape. So on our website, this is where we have a list of BMPs. We have general ones that apply to all businesses, and then some that are more targeted for like animal services and very more specific businesses that have specific requirements. So really, those are the stormwater, new stormwater requirements, highlights of those. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not going to walk through this lovely table here of new requirements. This is really a summary of the highlights of what we've talked about here. We have another table on for each of our ordinance updates that goes into much more detail. It identifies what the new provisions are. It gives you, the specific ordinance section to go to. So these are the highlights of the changes. If you want more detail, those are all on our webpage if you really want to take a deep dive. Next slide. Okay, so next steps. We are asking businesses and restaurants to let us know by July 15th if they have questions, if they have comments. We would be bringing all of this comments and feedback from our business community to you in our staff report when we bring the staff report with the proposed ordinance changes for all 4 new sections of the ordinance later on this summer. Of course, there's 2 readings for ordinances. After the ordinance is adopted, we would be doing another round of extensive outreach to make sure that our community knows about these changes. And ultimately, really our job is just to help keep our local creeks in the bay safe, also protect human health. And we're really looking forward to getting these new ordinance requirements adopted. So thank you.
All right, if I could just comment to connect the presentation you just received, and really appreciate the work that our Public Works staff has been doing. Connect this item to your discussion last night, and in particular on outdoor dining. So when I spoke to unintended consequences and things that people really don't want to think about, quite frankly, when they're enjoying the activation of our car-free streets, this is a perfect example of that, where, as noted, these are important issues to the health, sanitation, and providing a safe environment for our community. And at the same time, recognize that the plumbing systems and trash systems at our restaurants are designed basically for their building footprint. And now that we are encouraging increased food preparation to the point that they may be doubling or more their food production, that the consequence, unintended consequence, again, is dealing with fog, dealing with trash, dealing with the potential impacts to the storm sewer system as well. So as was noted, the ordinance changes are not triggered by outdoor dining, but there will clearly be the need for additional oversight, additional inspections and maintenance on the part of our restaurants, our food preparation facilities. And as such, we'll need to address issues and problems as they arise. But again, just to connect this topic to discussion last night, and I think that we'll have later at this meeting as well. Just wanted to make that point. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there any public comment?
I have no request to speak and no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, we will move to comments and questions.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you, Karen, Julie, and Gaba. Gaba, you're the one inspector.
Yes.
So it strikes me you are busy 24/7, 365.
Yes, busy. We do have some like a database and things now where that help me to sort of manage paperwork and keeping an eye on restaurants. So yes, busy, but within reason.
So when we talk about those who are expected to comply with the new ordinance, one component seems very, let's see, kitchen remodel or adds a bar, new restaurants. But if your grease control device is no longer working, so that's something that either is self-reported or you've got to catch it in an inspection. That feels to me to be the real wiggly one. And I just wonder, in the grand scheme, what degree of compliance do you currently feel you have? And what are we expecting will come with this new ordinance?
Degree of compliance, you mean in terms of whether those devices are functioning?
Yeah.
Yeah, so typically we will capture a lot of these new requirements, just to backtrack a little bit, to capture a lot of these new requirements through plan review, which I also do. So getting, those good new grease control device types installed. And we have quite a few of those already installed in the city. It's been about probably 10 years in the making of getting those newer ones installed. It's just like now it's going to be mandatory. So I would say it's hard to put an exact number on compliance of the grease control devices themselves. It's there. I would say it's a rather high compliance. I don't really find a lot that have a total need to be ripped out of the ground and be put back in. Sometimes there's minor repairs, like a pipe falls off and it needs to be put back on. So I would say a high compliance. And then, like you said, mostly this will be captured through inspections, self-reporting. Also, the haulers themselves, I've recently been working with a lot of the haulers that are active in the community to report not only to the restaurants, but to me as well. And so some of the haulers will put notes on there where they pumped it out and they see a hole, and then I'll go back out, I'll inspect, I'll have them pump it out again. I'll go to the pump out a lot of the times and actually see for myself. I have one ongoing right now with like that.
Thank you for mentioning the haulers, because that was my next question. Sort of, we have this, you can't do this, you've got to do this. There's, put the grease and fat and oil elsewhere. I'd love to know what the elsewhere is. I see the secondary containers, but I imagine the secondary containers are a piece of this.
Yeah, the secondary containers are going to be for that fryer oil that's
Right.
located outside.
Right. So someone hauls that away.
Someone hauls that away.
Right. What about the other stuff? Where,
So-
and if not down the drain, where does the other stuff go? Who hauls it?
Yeah, so it's similar to the waste fryer oil. Haulers that have, and maybe one of you can help me with this a little bit too. They're accredited through the county and everything, and they bring it to wastewater treatment plants, basically. I don't know if Karen wants to add anything.
Sure. So most of that, the hauled, so there's two types of oil, right? So there's the waste fryer oil. That gets hauled away, and that typically goes into, our facility doesn't have it, but they can go into to facilities that have anaerobic digesters. And San Jose has one and other facilities have one because then it can be put into a digester and it can create more energy.
Okay.
Our facility for our solids, currently, we got rid of our incinerator and we currently haul out our solids and it gets sent to two facilities and is created into Class A biosolids right now. And we're currently looking at a biosolids facility plan. We actually have another public meeting on July 1st if you'd like to attend via Zoom. So if you want to do it in the comfort of your home, so you don't have to be in another meeting room, but that will be our second public meeting. And we're trying to figure out whether we have facilities to space planning for our long range facility plan, planning out the next 50 years of our plant. But that's to create energy. Then there's also the nasty oils, right? Which is different. That's in the grease interceptor that's underground in a tank where all these kitchen oils that come from the pipes, where we want to capture that grease before it goes into the sanitary sewer line that comes to our facility that we treat. So it's a different kind of oil that gets pumped out. That also goes to the sanitary sewer treatment plants, but we also bypass that. That also gets put into, not to our facility, but to a digester and stuff, because we don't want it to go to the line. That actually can go to our headworks as well. Because we don't want it to get into our sanitary sewer line to become a clog, right? Because we can handle it. And that also can create energy. So usually a lot of that times it goes into a facility where they can get energy out of it and produce, right?
It sounds like it gets captured somewhere in something that we would call a pipe of some kind, but held, pumped.
Right.
So it doesn't go through the main system, then it gets treated when it gets right. It's a miracle. It's really incredible.
Right.
You mentioned you open with businesses and restaurants and so on, mobile businesses, but then at one point you mentioned residents, and it made me wonder, are we actively teaching our residents about their obligations around fat, soil, and grease?
We do in terms of education and outreach component. So we try and actively communicate to them about what they shouldn't put down a drain, mostly because you don't want to have a clog in your own drain, because then it costs you a couple $100 to have Roto-Rooter come out. So typically it's around the holidays. So we put a lot of education outreach, utility bill inserts at that point in time. So we do an active education outreach campaign about that, about what not to put down your drain. So, and we do tours of the sewage treatment plant. We're always communicating, educating what should and shouldn't go down the drain, because what our plant can and can't treat, but also what the sewer lines can handle.
We also partner closely with our utilities outreach group too. So if we have problem hotspots in a neighborhood, we have door hangers to flag for residents that there may be a problem in their neighborhood and to remind them about not just bog, but also tree roots and all of these other things that can combined cause sanitary sewer overflows.
Thank you. And my last question might be for our city manager, just because it's sort of taking a broad look at the city as a whole. This seems to be one important component of the city where we have a whole lot of systems in place. We have rules, we enforce the rules, we take it very seriously, because if we don't, there's going to be all of this backup consequence, terrible, terrible, terrible. But it does speak to our ability to do code enforcement effectively. And in some places, we have more resources for that, and others we don't. Oftentimes we talk about, well, we just don't have the bandwidth, like for a gas leaf blower ban enforcement. We can't go catch all of that. Or the people speeding in their e-bikes that are really more like motorcycles. We talk about, well, how are we going to stop them? So this strikes me as an area where we have a well-oiled machine. Sorry, that just came out of my mouth. But, it seems to sort of be working. And am I right about that? When you think about the extent to which we can enforce compliance, this feels like it's sort of a gold star example, or an example of like the system is
The system is well structured, designed
versus others.
Versus, quite frankly, in the counter example, the zoning code, right? What resource? How does an organization structure around enforcement of the zoning code? Quite frankly, part of it comes down to dollars and the fact that how do we fund this program?
Well,
That's what I'm really asking. Where are we getting this money, and where's the
from
rest of it?
wastewater.
Yeah, so it's rate funds in a way. And so being an enterprise fund does create that ecosystem that enables the resources to be allocated based upon the costs of maintaining the system, the broad system. Our zoning code does not have such an ecosystem.
Really helpful. Thank you very much. That's it for me.
Yeah, so just following up first on kind of the ecosystem part, it may have been kind of implied, but we really have two issues. How do we control what goes into the sanitary sewer system? And how do we control what goes into the storm drain system, which discharges directly to the bay without all the treatment that we do that at the wastewater treatment plant? And we don't want businesses to load the wastewater treatment plant with materials that should in fact be dealt with independently and off-site. So as I look at the different measures, really the third one is the plumbing connection changes. That's the one that helps reduce what's going into the sanitary sewer system. And then the rest are really addressing on the stormwater discharge. And the second point of the GCD sizing is the one that appears to be based upon changes in volume. The rest are qualitative changes, where we're saying we want practices that, regardless of the volume, we have a set of new requirements that are going to improve the quality of the controls that we have versus the quantity. So these all look really solid. And I think that for me, a lot of that is that the context of, for instance, the outdoor dining, it's a question of managing mitigations as opposed to restrictions or prohibitions that say, oh, we can't handle any more capacity. We just simply have to have the rules in place to assure that first, that basically on the sizing, that simply means that any increase in capacity has to be met. And then actually the others are saying that we're with that, whether it's the indoor dining or the outdoor dining, we have a set of new requirements that will have improvements in assuring that the businesses are not discharging or inadvertently, whether they're indoor dining or outdoor dining. So I only see the one that really is related to outdoor dining directly, and that's the sizing, and that makes perfect sense that we've got to make sure that capacity is met. What are the bodies that are reviewing this again? I think before the meeting, we're hearing you're going on a dog and pony show.
Yes, well, let's see, we had several public meetings back in March for food facilities, for the broader stormwater ordinance, wastewater, including some of our partners. The broader stormwater ordinance, we also invited residents to. We did all the outreach that we talked about. We went last week to Cal Ave. We're doing University Ave. You'll see us again today, and then we're here today. So we will have done a total of 6 public meetings.
Okay, great. And then both the cost and the timing. Have you? I guess it's hard to estimate because on either of those, because it depends on how many of these actions or these requirements would require a new action by a business. Some may have much of this in place and others don't. So can can you give some kind of a range in terms of the cost? I know that you said on the secondary containment, you thought it was about $1,000. What about the other changes that are here? Yeah, do we?
Like for a grease control device?
Well, yeah, first, the materials on the GCD, if they're having to change from concrete and metal to fiberglass and plastic, that's one. The plumbing fixture connections are many restaurants having to do changes there, or is that just making sure that outliers aren't doing a wrong thing?
So do you want me to take the initial stab and then maybe you want to go first?
I mean, why don't you go first and I'll see if I can just fill in anything.
Okay. So typically we're not targeting restaurants unless they're having an issue. So in the tenure that I've been overseeing this group, most of this is we're just codifying things that we have been doing for the last decade. We've been working on this ordinance change for a decade. So we're just now, like, all the different things that we've been doing, working with the restaurants, we just are like, okay, we need to put that in the code. We need to put that in the code just to make it really clear for restaurants what we expect, and also to make it fair, right? So the restaurants that we had issues, that we had a sanitary sewer overflow, we're like, oh, we really should put that in the code to make sure it's really clear and fair for everybody else. So typically we don't require it unless they have a sanitary sewer overflow and we see an issue. And that's really what we're doing. And then it's usually a compliance agreement. So we don't mandate it immediately. So typically we're going to work with them. We're going to, if they have a sanitary sewer overflow, then we try and find the path that gives them the time frame, but it's not cheap. We know that it's not cheap, which is why we work with them and have a compliance agreement. GABA goes into their kitchen, tries to find, okay, which ones that really are the pinch points that are causing the grease. So it has been a real partnership with the restaurants, because we know, especially coming out of the pandemic, some of them, it was really tough. So, I mean, I just want to assure council that it's not something that we're like a heavy hand, like
So that January 1st, 2026 date is the date
that
it. Oh, sorry.
That's for the secondary containment for just the waste fryer.
I see.
That's just the $1,000 one
Okay.
estimate. Everything else has been what we've been doing realistically for the last
So
10
you're
years.
codifying what you've been doing. Got
Yeah.
it.
So
Okay.
And just to
sorry.
add, I was going to say the new material of the GCDs, they actually are more efficient. They're smaller. They have a smaller footprint. They typically cost less than those big gravity grease interceptors that we see being installed. So, and because they're more efficient and because we're going to size them with not just flow rate alone, but with meals served and type of cuisine, we're hoping that we can extend the pump out, the maintenance of it, to the full 90 days rather than every 2 weeks, every month, so we're trying to save them money in the long run that way as well. And like Karin mentioned, like I have a enforcement action going on with the restaurant right now where we are requiring them to change out their GCD. It's a small metal box. There's a hole. It's a mess. And basically we're giving them 6 months right now. But of course, like as long as we're in communication and we know that things are moving forward, if there's any hiccups along the way, then we will, push that out and work with them as much as we can.
Good. That kind of collaboration sounds really good. I have to tell you that probably for Brad, this bit of a flashback to where he got started with the city, which was our heavy metals program in manufacturing, and where we did something that was at the time sort of a first of its kind. It was to work with all the businesses to help provide them with best practices. They had an alternative of kind of a command and control limitation that would have restricted them more. But instead, the vast majority found that in many cases, it was more cost effective to do better, newer technologies. And that was kind of transformative. So I have one other question. You talked about mobile businesses, and we have a big issue with mobile residents, RVs, basically, and we hear story after story of issues of dumping into sewers, which is direct discharge, meaning it's not going through our wastewater treatment plant. It's flowing immediately to the bay. What, if anything, are we thinking about on how to manage that issue from this standpoint?
Well, we know that unhoused is definitely, we have empathy and it's definitely a concern. Public Works staff has worked with the city manager's office on this. We go out and do with this, with also police, when there is an issue. There are our waste hauling program, they can go out and pump out those RVs. So we try and make sure that they know that there's waste haulers that will go out and actually pump. The problem is that the people that are unhoused also don't have the money to pay. And so when they do discharge it onto the street, then our public works team that Brad manages, they actually go out and clean it. So we are spending a lot of resources and time to go out, but we're not charging them. So our team for compliance is alerted, and then we work with our public works team to go out and actually clean it. So it's a lot of energy right now.
Yeah, and what portion of those discharges are we even alerted to?
Correct. But a lot of as you know, Palo Alto residents are very well educated and they know who to call. So they have direct call. A lot of us are directly called and we are informed. But yes, and I mean, we've been reaching out to our partner agencies too that have the same issue. They've been piloting other programs about trying to do the mobile pumping program, and it hasn't been successful. Unfortunately, even because a lot of these RVs are not, they've even tried to do having a septic hauling receiving station in Mountain View at a location. And because a lot of these vehicles are not moving. So that's the other issue.
Now,
So
to get a handle on how much of a problem this actually is, do we do sampling within certain branch lines where we have concentrations of these vehicles to know?
in the storm drain system?
Yeah.
No, because that's a whole other can of worms that I don't, we can probably talk offline, but if we do the sampling, then it probably would open us up for litigation and lawsuits. Other communities have gotten sued in Mountain View
Sued on what basis?
for the unhoused and for discharged to the creeks and bay.
For allowing the pollution.
Allowing the pollution. Because that is a violation to our stormwater permit. And so the Mountain View has been that's a whole other, I mean, there's other communities within our stormwater permit, municipal regional stormwater permit, we are not allowed to discharge anything out to the bay. So we hopefully clean it up before it reaches our storm drain system.
I do
before
want
it
to add
hits the
that
bay.
within our stormwater permit, there is a whole section for what is our role in contributing to illegal discharges from unhoused populations. And so there is, I know that there is a regional interest to re-look at what kind of services can we be providing to RVs that need to have these kind of services that they can't pay for. So I know that there are continued conversations that are going to probably be ramping up further on in the permit term.
Okay, thanks. All right, thank you.
Can we talk more about the mobile septic? I mean, we talked about this during our homeless study session. Have we tried going around and just go door to door and say, here's a pump. Can we pump out your septic for the RVs?
So the city has not hired a contractor to do that ourselves. The city has provided information about a private contractor, private septic hauler that will do that.
But the residents don't pay.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. Would we spend less money doing that than going and cleaning up the spills after they happen?
Great question.
Okay. So is someone studying this or are we just
It's-
kind of hoping?
I would note that a couple of things. One, I do think we're getting a little off topic here, but the topic is going to the Policy and Services Committee in August. So the question of additional regulations and next steps related to RV dwelling.
Okay. That's
And our
great.
group does participate in conversations with the city manager's office about in-house populations and what services that we can provide. And I have been speaking with Melissa about this. And again, there is a lot of regional interest in trying to look again at what kind of services that we can provide. We have to do that a little bit later in our permit term because of other near-term permit requirements that we have to meet. But this is a nearly weekly conversation in our office because we have RVs on our street where our office is. We are seeing those discharges happen ourselves. We are seeing the state of some of these RVs. It is very present and right front and center on our radar, and we want to be doing something about this. So we are committed to being part of this discussion. And again, we're working closely with the city manager's office and our regional partners on this issue.
Okay. How about food trucks? Do we have any problems with food trucks either spilling trash or spilling oil?
We don't have a ton of food trucks from what I've seen in the city. We had some issues at the farmer's market with those food stalls and trucks that come. And so I worked with the group that manages that farmer's market. We just created a new fact sheet. So that webpage that Julie showed during the presentation has one that's targeted to mobile food facilities and farmers markets specifically. And so myself and Furman from Public Works Services, we went out and we did outreach to the farmers market and provided that outreach material. And then we have some crews, some maintenance crews that do trash and things like that. So they kind of keep an eye on things and they'll let me know. And then, I do have plans to go back and double check on their BMPs, but it seems like we've got that pretty well controlled at the moment.
Okay. And so after the farmer's market, is someone responsible for going and sweeping up? Or is that,
Yes, I believe there's maintenance crews that they discard the trash and do the street sweeping.
okay, very good. Can you go to slide 9, please? This is talking about the city will collaborate with businesses in space constrained locations. And can you talk more about that?
Sure. So that I'm referring to the alleyways where there needs to be access for emergency vehicles or just regular vehicles. There's already dumpster bins, there's waste oil bins, there's cars parking. So kind of considering that those are space constrained. And so if we're adding secondary containment, it's going to increase the footprint of that waste oil bin. So we need to sort of think outside the box in those situations. And that'll be a lot of me going out and physically looking, bringing a tape measure and working with the fire department to also make sure that we are in compliance with their regulations, and then working with the businesses. So like Lot A over here, and especially downtown, it's more space constrained. So we're going to have to figure out creative ways to meet this requirement, but still keep in mind the.
And so what happens if there's not enough room? Then what kind of creative ways do you?
So things like putting awnings maybe that are coming out from the building themselves. So instead of having like a freestanding device like the one pictured, you might keep it where it is already, but have an awning to come out to cover that. They even make things like really heavy duty tarps that are fitted to the waste oil bin itself that'll help with stormwater runoff and things like that. So there's a lot of things on the market where and where it would only increase the footprint by a few inches. And I think that could work in a lot of cases, or possibly seeing if some of these restaurants can bring their waste oil bins inside, or maybe they have smaller waste oil bins that they can just get pumped more frequently, or again, bring it inside. And then that sort of takes away that whole issue.
And some do bring it inside?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How about like a Stanford Shopping Center? Does each restaurant have their own bin, or does they have a community bin?
Primarily, each restaurant has their own bin, but most of their refuse areas are stored indoors. So they don't have as big an issue with the waste oil bins there.
Okay. And can we do anything where multiple restaurants use the same bin?
Yeah, I mean, that gets a little bit sticky, literally speaking. It just.
I can see it being cleaner having everyone have their own bin, but that seems like
Right.
a lot of redundancy. Is that
I would say if everyone has their own bin, the bins could be smaller, which may help in certain cases with space constraints. Sharing also, I mean, with, like I said, we want them to be locked and labeled, so that will help with sharing, because a lot of the times, like lot A, we go and talk to people and everyone, goes like this, it's not me, it's them. Also, a lot of times, like, people won't lock it, and then we have vandalism issues and issues with, just people passing by and messing with it. So it gets a little bit more muddy when they share, but that might have to be the way it is in certain areas. And so we're not going to prohibit that, but it's not something that personally I would like to encourage.
Can you go to the next slide, slide 10? And so on that bottom right plot or picture, that's really common. And that's a public curb, I assume. Who's responsible there if the business is outside and maybe either their clientele or they have it, but we don't know who put that trash there? Who's responsible? 'Cause that's going to go into public sewers, right? It's not, they don't have a local.
Stormwater, yeah.
Storm drain system.
Yeah.
That's not treated, right?
This one is actually interesting, and I didn't touch on this when it came to the slide initiative. So we do have a really strict requirement to reduce our trash entering the storm drain system by 100% this year. And we're on track to meet that requirement by July. So we're going to do that. And the way that we do that and the way we're going to meet that is by installing what's called small trash capture devices, those baskets that we talked about earlier. So in addition to the normal street sweeping, in addition to some businesses who do take ownership or responsibility, we also have these trash capture devices that are going to be installed to keep that from entering the storm drain.
In public drains.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It depends on the location. Some of those may only be serviced a couple of times a year, depending on where they're at, and some may be serviced much more frequently.
It just strikes me that those baskets then become a source of potential clog.
And it really depends on the actual storm drain itself, because they vary. It's not a one size fits all. Some are this big, some are this big. And so our a different group within Public Works goes out to maintain those sites, and they have a regular schedule depending on the location in the city to make sure they're getting cleaned out frequently enough.
And did you say you're reducing the impact of the not having the capture? You're reducing that by 100%, which means you're putting a capture everywhere.
Not everywhere. We have other measures that we comply with to help reduce it. But in the areas where we have the biggest trash loading, that's where we put them. Those devices are not cheap. And so we have targeted the areas where that's the appropriate solution. In other areas, it may be periodic just trash cleanups. We also work with the Downtown Streets Committee team to also be picking up trash. We have regular trash cleanups in different areas throughout the year. So there are different methods depending on the location.
Okay. And so we have a trash capture device for the private drains, and also the grease control devices. Who's responsible? Is it the landlord or the renter or the leaser?
Typically, it's the leasee. It depends on their agreement, obviously, but usually it's the business owner that's leasing the space. But obviously, it's up to the property owner to make sure that's clear.
Okay. And we size it. So if someone's building a new restaurant, we size it for 90-day clean out. That's the rule of thumb.
That's our target. Mm-hmm.
And how do we determine that?
So there's a whole sizing calculation, and I go through it in much more detail on our recorded public meeting too. But basically, when they submit through plan review, they will be submitting the type of cuisine, and we have a table where it's ranked about like what the FOG output would be for that, then how many estimated meals per day are served, and then what the pump out period should be. And it has to be minimum 30 days, maximum 90 days, because we don't want it to sit too long because that corrosive nature of FOG. And then that gives us a FOG output, and then we would go and look at a GCD manufacturer and see which one aligns with that.
Okay, and you would then look meals per day. They would include parklets and everything.
Yes,
if they're starting a new restaurant.
Yes,
You're just saying we're grandfathering the people who have an existing.
Yeah, we're not going to be retrofitting unless absolutely necessary for some reason.
And if now someone has a parklet, has a whole bunch of meals and clogs things up, and we say you need a bigger one, then we will size it for their number of meals, including the parklet.
Yes, and our first step, of course, would be to best management practices and then more frequent maintenance and see if that solves the problem first. But if it doesn't for some reason and they needed to install either an additional GCD or a new one, then yes, that new sizing calculation would come into effect.
And typical restaurants, do they hit that 90 days or they have to do it more frequently?
It really depends. The ones that have bigger units will usually hit the 90 days. Some of these really small places that have just like a small grease trap just under their 3-comp sink, they're pumping out every 30 days.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'd like to extend that, obviously, like I said before, because the maintenance cost over time would be much reduced.
Is it expensive to get pumped out? Or?
Those small traps, they range about maybe $75. And then the big gravity grease interceptors, those like, 3,000 or 1,500 gallon, they probably are in the like $500 to $750 range. And they're mostly getting pumped out every 90 days, sometimes more though. But probably on average for those smaller ones, about $100 a month.
Okay, thank you. Any follow-ups?
Just one. So I realize that your monitoring of grease trap volume is kind of an indirect indicator of certain things, and we see that we in many circumstances we actually our evening dining, dinner dining is up, but lunch dining is down. What are you seeing on the total over the last several years, a percent increase or?
So I've been in this position for 2 years, so I only really have knowledge up to 2 years ago. I would say that, the time of day when it's busy doesn't really matter so much because it sits in there for quite a while. I would say that there's probably an overall increase. I mean,
Last 2 years, yeah.
Yeah, an
But you
overall
don't have that
increase.
point of reference.
No, I mean, I actually just saw the previous inspector at a training on Monday, and we talked about it, and it seems like it's been ramping up, and we want it to. We want these businesses to be thriving and more fog output. We just want to control where it goes.
We have this assumption that whatever increase we have in dinner dining means that we have that level of increase in dining overall, but we forget that our daytime dining is
there's an
still
average
way
there.
down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
One last question. You mentioned about the grease getting into the stormwater. Is that like if the GCD overflows and then it rolls into the?
It can be that. It can also be if if it's bypassing into the plumbing lines, and then those plumbing lines clog, and so then it comes out of the sanitary sewer overflow. So the manhole is outside, and then it flows into the storm drains. And then again, those waste oil bins, if they have drippings on the top, and then it rains, that also can flow into the storm system. So lots of opportunities.
Okay.
No boy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Trying. Yeah.
One last, we're not hearing, you were saying the charges for pump out, but I recall a time where we were having a theft of grease and oils, not just in our city, because of the value of it. I had a friend who had a biodiesel car, and you could smell them. I mean, it was a different odor from the exhaust, but that's not an issue. Okay, thanks.
Julie, you have any follow-ups?
Are you recommending we all go vegan?
Vegan has some fog byproducts too. Yeah.
Coconut oil.
Yeah, coconut oil is a big one.
Okay, so next steps. Do you want to summarize anything else on this topic?
You mean, I think staff has gone over it. We will continue to do outreach, and then ultimately these ordinances will come forward to the council for review.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to the next action item.
Chair, if I may,
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to check if you wanted to open an additional round of public comment because we did have someone with their hand raised on Zoom.
Yes, please.
Okay. Our first speaker will be Martin B. Martin, I've just allowed you the capability to unmute, and you should be able to provide your public comment.
Okay, thanks. You're able to hear me? Good.
Yes.
Thanks for the meeting, Chair Rectal and Ruth for organizing everything. Chair Rectal, you mentioned about street sweeping. There are often times when the street sweeper comes around, maybe either 2 in the morning or 5 in the morning in the downtown area. There are no signs in many streets that says no parking between 2 and 3 a.m. for street sweeping on Wednesday, for example. San Francisco has that nailed down pretty easily. And there's about a $120 citation for someone who doesn't move it during that 1 hour. Are there any programs in Palo Alto for the street sweeping not to park during that 1 hour? That's my question. Thanks.
Did you? Okay. Okay. We will not address that at this meeting, but that's a very good comment. Okay, thank you. We will move on to the next action item. And this is the near-term streetscape improvements and outdoor activation standards for Ramona. Yep.
Great.
Okay.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. Ashwini Kantak with the City Manager's Office, working on some special projects in downtown. I'm joined via Zoom by the consultant who's been working on this from Urban Planning Partners, Hannah Chan-Smith. We look forward to your feedback today on streetscape improvements as well as the draft outdoor activation standards for pedestrian-only Ramona Street. Before we get into the presentation itself, I wanted to just provide some context and set expectations. The near-term improvements are fairly limited in scope and are designed to complement the historic street. A future phase with a much broader scope has been briefly discussed, but this will take a lot more conversation and buy-in from the stakeholders to identify funding sources, and it's not something we will be focusing on today. The outdoor activation standards are similarly designed to allow flexibility, but not detract from the architecture. And you'll see that the standards developed for Ramona are quite different from the ongoing Parklet program, which offers a lot more design flexibility and to allow building of enclosed spaces. Not only is the pedestrian portion of Ramona Street historic, but it is only about 200 feet in length, and having the ongoing Parklet program standards applied here would create a lot of visual clutter and not really align with the historic architecture of the street. Also, just wanted to note that we have conducted stakeholder engagement, and a lot of our recommendations are based on what we heard from both the downtown stakeholder working group as well as Ramona Street stakeholders, but we have not looped back with a general community meeting. So we are looking forward to your feedback, and I know we'll be hearing from some of the stakeholders as well today. Next slide, please. So an overview of the agenda, we'll do a brief background, talk about what we heard from the stakeholders, and then again, Hannah will present the streetscape improvements as well as the outdoor activation standards. Since we have not had the community meeting yet, we will discuss what we are looking to in terms of specific feedback from the community meeting, which will be held next month. And then we'll go over an implementation timeline and open it up for public comment and committee discussion. Next slide, please. Next. So again, as I mentioned, the scope of improvements is fairly limited in this first phase, which is near-term improvements. So we're really looking at some pretty modest streetscape improvements as well as the outdoor activation standards, primarily dining and retail standards. There could be a potential phase 2 in the future if there's, again, buy-in and funding identified, which could reimagine the street, kind of look at maybe a no-curve street, gateway elements, but again, not part of today's discussion. Next slide, please. So I think, as all of you are aware, the Ramona Street Architectural District was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in February 1986. It offers some great examples of Spanish Revival and Monterey Colonial styles that were introduced by some renowned architects, Pedro de Lemos and Clerk. And the buildings were primarily built between 1925 and 1938. There was one, the Cardinal Hotel, that was built in 1924. But that's a neoclassical style. And as you're very familiar with this street, the character of this district really features handcrafted pavements, a lot of great glazing for the pavers, courtyard spaces that go sort of in and out of the public realm. So there's a lot of arcades and courtyards that invite you in, a lot of wrought iron work with the balconies, and then decorative tiles, as I mentioned, that evoke images of Spanish villages. And this is something very important to keep in mind as we look at the outdoor activation standards, because for the ongoing Parklet program, we allowed a lot of flexibility in terms of design expression and really allowing restaurants to express themselves through creative designs. In this case, because of the historic nature and kind of the very limited space, the architecture, the existing architecture really dictates kind of what we'd want to have here based on, what we're recommending today, and look forward to hearing your feedback. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, in late February this year, we had a meeting where we had invited our downtown stakeholder working group that advises us on various things related to the downtown, including the University Avenue project. And we had also specifically invited the Ramona Street stakeholders to this meeting. We followed up, so we solicited input on a variety of things, and I'll go through that in a bit. But we also followed up with a survey, so that allowed people to give us a little bit more detailed feedback and allowed them some time to think about it. And the survey was focused on streetscape design, wayfinding, and outdoor activation, so wayfinding signage. So overall, there was very strong consensus to reflect the Spanish Revival style, and because of that, much more openness to having greater design uniformity and kind of more prescriptive design so that there is a more cohesive look within this historic district. Really, people wanted to make sure we did not detract from the existing architecture. It's something that draws a lot of visitors, and people felt like whatever we did on this street should really complement and not take away from the existing architecture. We asked for feedback on streetscape elements like the paving, and there was a strong preference for stamped and colored asphalt over standard asphalt or over painting over the asphalt. Currently, the tree wells create some issues, and we asked about decomposed granite versus flexi-pave treatment. I know that some people would like more of the metal grades, but given kind of the limited budget for this project, we were trying to work within that, and so looking at a flexi-pave treatment seemed like a good way to go. There was a preference for minimal signage. Given, again, the short length of the street, people did not feel like we needed to introduce a lot of signage to orient people because it's a short walk, and did not want a lot of signage, again, cluttering the aesthetics. And then we will have at the two ends of the pedestrian street some sort of barriers, vehicle barriers, and again, wanting those to reflect the historic style of the street, whether it's with the finishes or the earth tones, so the material palettes, accents. And then for landscaping, there was a preference for planting and trees. However, there were some comments about making sure that we weren't planting in a way that we would obscure the historic architecture. Next slide, please. Then we talked about kind of elements that we would include in the outdoor activation standards. And again, preference in terms of edge treatment to divide up the spaces using wrought iron or planters. This is one unique one here. I heard your discussion yesterday on CalAV. In this case, there was a strong preference for no permanent roof structures, umbrellas only to provide shade. And part of this is the fact that, again, it's a small street, it's historic. If we did do roof structures, we would have to get a lot more prescriptive. And right now, if you see on the street, there's only one restaurant that has a roof structure. Everybody else does not. They have umbrellas. Furnishing, there was some mixed feedback about being flexible versus prescriptive. The compromise in our recommendations has been to make sure we ask for high quality furniture that's commercial grade, that can be well maintained, no plastic, etc., but to allow a little bit more flexibility in terms of type and color of furniture. Platform. So this is again where it sort of deviates from the ongoing Parklet program, where we looked at the street, and because there's sidewalk and arcade space available, we felt like we could meet the ADA requirements for dining purposes with seating located in those spaces on the sidewalk or in the arcade, and not have to build up. Part of the thinking was that, make it low cost. This is not meant to be a huge effort. We didn't want to, kind of put in requirements that are going to require restaurants to invest a lot of money to build these outdoor spaces. And so we're envisioning dining and retail just using the pavement and again, meeting the ADA requirements with dining on the sidewalk. And so there's no platforms. However, just wanted to share that from the stakeholders, there was kind of a maybe 50-50 in terms of at grade versus platforms. Platforms are more expensive. They do run into some drainage issues. And so we felt like here we could kind of go with the at grade dining. We asked some feedback on outdoor activation. This is not something we're focusing on today, but it's something that we would work with our community services department to look at maybe how these spaces could be programmed. And there was preference for interactive art performances, retail pop-ups, et cetera, as well. And then there was some other general feedback about making sure we had safety and cleanliness standards incorporated, that we were considering short-term deliveries as well as ADA compliance for not just path of travel, but also for parking. And we'll talk about some of the efforts related to that are working in parallel with this project. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it over to Hannah to walk us through both the improvements as well as the standards, and then we'll come back with an implementation timeline discussion. Anna?
Thanks, Ashwini. So based on the community's feedback and the historic elements of the street, as Ashwini talked about, the streetscape design is based on a color scheme and material quality that complements the Spanish Revival architecture of the street. So the color scheme is designed with warm, earthy tones in mind, as well as green and blue accents to match the existing tile work throughout the street. The materials are inspired by the terracotta tiles, cobblestones, and decorative ceramics, as well as the stucco walls and the ornamental wrought iron work featured throughout the street. Next slide. So going over some of the streetscape improvements planned for phase 1. The first is the resurfacing of Ramona Street between Hamilton and University Avenue with stamped and colored asphalt to be used in the pedestrian only portion of the street. So the center, fire access, and then on, creating crosswalks from sidewalk to sidewalk across the street. The asphalt stamp and color can be done in a variety of patterns in almost any color. So on the left-hand side of this slide are 2 examples of a stamped and colored asphalt path. In the middle, you see existing stone pavers that are seen around the arcades and courtyards around Ramona Street. And on the far right are some examples of the patterns that can be done. Next slide. The second improvement is custom decorative planters to be installed at either end of the street, and we'll go into some of the options later on in the slide. Next slide. Other streetscape improvements include providing flexi-plate tree well treatments, as Ashwini mentioned, and replacing the temporary vehicle barriers with permanent retractable or movable barriers, as well as repairing the sidewalk where necessary and installing curb ramps to provide accessible paths for pedestrians. Next slide. Through a separate but related project, staff will be updating traffic signage at the University Avenue and Ramona intersection to indicate that a portion of the street is closed to vehicular traffic. The project will include replacing signage on existing poles and installing a new pole with a no outlet sign. Staff are also looking at reconfiguring parking to include accessible parking, commercial loading, short-term parking, and a red curb so that there is space for cars to turn around. Next slide. The full set of draft activation standards are provided on packet page 18 and onwards. As Ashwini mentioned, the outdoor activation standards draw upon the city's ongoing parklet program, but they have been refined to respond to the unique conditions of the historic street and the pedestrian-only environment that will be the car-free Ramona Street. Next slide. So car-free Ramona Street will consist of 4 street zones. First is the arcade shown in pink, which is an extension of the private buildings and includes entryways and recesses set back from the building frontage. Second is the activation zone shown in blue, which is the area designated for outdoor dining, retail merchandise, and non-commercial activity. And that is located adjacent to the building and then on the first portion of the street. Third is the pedestrian zone, which is an 8-foot zone to provide circulation and access. And then lastly is the fire access lane at the center of the street to provide emergency access. Next slide. So this slide just simply shows a plan view of the activation zones. And so you can see in red, again, the arcade, the activation zones in blue, and the pedestrian zone in yellow. Next slide. So buildings are required to locate their outdoor activation space directly in front of their storefront. And activation is permitted in the arcade in pink and the activation zone in blue. Of course, activation shall not obstruct the pedestrian path, the fire access, ADA ramps, or setbacks, which we'll talk about. And consistent with council direction for the ongoing parklet program in January, any outdoor activation that extends beyond the applicant's storefront requires a letter of consent from the neighboring ground floor tenants. Next slide. So outdoor activations shall be set back from manhole covers and shall not obstruct storm drain catch basins or utilities. Next slide. Permitted activities, as Ashwini kind of mentioned already, include dining, retail, and non-commercial activities with the appropriate approvals in coordination with the city. Next slide. So moving on to talk a little bit about the design. All outdoor activation will be completely at grade, so no platforms will be required or permitted, and barrier planters will be required for outdoor dining along the fire lane edge of the activation space. So as you can see highlighted in red on the graphic, and planters shall be can be spaced apart and shall be planted consistent with a plant palette, which we can talk about later in the presentation. And they'll also be subject to maintenance standards. Non-dining uses are not required to have planters, so they can be open to pedestrians from both the fire lane and the sidewalk. Next slide. So dividers will be required on either edge of the activation area to delineate the privately operated space. So as you can see, again, highlighted in red, and we have opted for movable panel dividers and have kind of curated 2 options, which we'll go into for the community feedback. Next slide. Umbrellas will be permitted to provide shade, and as Ashwini mentioned, based on the community's feedback and the desire to be complementary to the historic street, permanent roof or permanent structures will not be permitted. Next slide. The standards recommend that outdoor seating should be arranged in line with the slope of the street. So as you can see in the image here of the on the slide, and furnishing shall be high quality, durable, outdoor rated, non-reflective. So for example, no plastic furniture. Seating must also comply with ADA requirements. Next slide. Additional outdoor activation standards apply and are included in the full standards in the packet, but some highlights include lighting that only solar powered string lights and table lights will be permitted. Heating, propane heaters would be permitted with a hazmat permit, and no electrical heaters would be permitted. As no permanent electricity can be brought to the outdoor activation area. Branding and signage is consistent with the ongoing program, so 1 sign per business and not permitted on umbrellas, awnings, or vertical screens. There will be waste management standards and operational standards, including site maintenance, plant and planter maintenance, outdoor dining and retail operation standards. I also want to note that restaurants will be responsible to comply with the FOG program requirements, including grease control device system maintenance standards. In addition, outdoor activation areas will be subject to fees, permit, license fees, renewal, and refundable deposit, which are also outlined in your packet. Next slide. So just to highlight here, the only standards that are required for all outdoor activation areas are dividers, site maintenance, and waste management standards. Outdoor dining must also comply with the barrier, planters, and ADA standards. And the rest would be optional. Next slide. So in summary, the key differences between the proposed Ramona outdoor activation standards and the ongoing program are that no permanent roof structures or sidewalls would be permitted. Outdoor activation is at grade, so no platforms. No vehicular setbacks or vehicle safety measures will be required, as it'll be in a pedestrian-only street. No setbacks between outdoor activation zones would be required because without permanent roof structures, access can be easily provided from the fire emergency access lane to the buildings, and no electrical connections are allowed, which eliminates the ability for electrical heaters or permanent lighting. And as Ashwini described, we are looking to have more restrictive design requirements. I did just want to highlight again that consistent with the ongoing program, a letter of consent requirements will apply on Ramona Street as well. Next slide. So we are looking forward to looping back with the community next month and seeking some feedback to help us finalize the outdoor dining standards, including, next slide. Including the streetscape asphalt stamp in color. And in here you can see a couple of options of combinations, and option 1 and 2 are inspired by existing paving within the historic area, but classic herringbone or brick stamp options are available as well. Next slide. We're also hoping to get feedback on preferred entry planter designs, and 2 options that we've identified are custom planters with inset lettering, and that would allow customization of color and texture, shape and size, font and lettering, and it would allow us to inset graphics as well. Option 2 is a bit more minimal option with planters with a custom logo, and the option to provide inset decorative hardware or ironwork as well. Next slide. For the barrier planters for outdoor dining, there are 2 options that we have identified and are seeking feedback on. The first is to require low planters with taller grasses and planting. So low planters being 18 to 24 inches. And this option would create greater visibility and openness by maintaining sight lines across the street. The outdoor dining areas would feel more connected and integrated with the street. It would allow for more greenery and taller plants. And these planters being shorter are also slightly more cost effective. The second option on the right would be to have taller planters with low plants. And this option would create a greater sense of separation from the surrounding area, offer a little bit of wind buffering and privacy, and create a more enclosed dining atmosphere. Next slide. For each planter barrier option, we've also put together a plant palette. Both plant palettes are made up of plants that require very low water needs, and maintenance standards would also apply. And so we'll seek feedback from the community on, if there are other plants that are desired for the street. Next slide. So as mentioned previously, we have identified 2 options for dividers. The first are laser cut metal panels made out of steel or corten, and they can be done in any pattern. So we can design a custom pattern unique to Ramona, and they can also be completed in a variety of colors. The second option would be canvas panels, which can also be done in any color options and have post material options of wood or metal. And that is a more cost effective panel option. So from the community, we're specifically kind of asking if there is a preference, if there should only be one or divider option, or if both could be available. Next slide. And lastly is umbrellas, and seeking feedback on preferred colors, how many colors should be provided, and preferred size and shape. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Ashwini to go over implementation.
Thanks, Hannah. If we could go to the next slide. So this is the implementation timeline. As you can see, it's pretty accelerated to get all of the improvements completed by the end of this year, and we may have to adjust based on stakeholder feedback as well as coordination with the public art program. So we may need to adjust this, just prefacing that. As I mentioned, we are planning for a community meeting in July and then council consideration in August. Again, if needed, we can adjust that. I'd just like to make one note is that the parklets on Ramona have been operating first under the temporary parklet program for several years, and then just the cleanliness and maintenance standards of the ongoing program have applied. So they have not been asked to make any changes or modify their parklets up till now. So this is the one where it would be new standards, and they would, we're going to leverage the street resurfacing project that Public Works does on an annual basis. And so they would be similar to what happened last year with the parklets. They would be required to demolish the existing parklets or outdoor dining areas. And then all future dining and retail areas would need to comply with the adopted outdoor activation standards. So with that, I know we're running late, so we'll stop there and happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to public comment unless you have any questions. Okay.
So when I call your name, you can please come have a seat here and use the microphone to provide your public comment. Our first speaker will be John S.
Perfect. John. Yeah. All this technology. John Shank with Thwaites Brothers. I have a lot of comments. I'm just going to roll through them pretty quickly to the degree there's an opportunity for a question or anything else. I'm happy to add color. As I go through this, I'm concerned about the public, meaning cities, management and maintenance of the street and how that's really going to work out, because as I've shared over these years, safety, cleanliness are critical. And I think as we get into shared spaces, retailers, public, an event or something, what's going to get lost is who's on first, who's responsible, why is it not clean or safe? In the feedback, the Thwaites family very involved in the city's history. We love the Palo Alto History Museum. Ramona Street's historic designation on the state federal registry and everything else, super important. So hopefully through all of this, there's never and all respect to everybody who's working on this, no staff person who's deciding what the design of the metal barrier ought to be. It needs to go through that historic process to make sure we're being very respectful of that. I think that would, as much as I'm not a fan of the closed street, if it's going to happen, let's do it right. I worry about activities that still show up on the lists like play areas and these sorts of things. Again, back to safety and cleanliness. If we're gonna have a play area, I know Menlo Park tried it. It didn't work. It was dirty, the animals. Anyway, let's be very careful about all these uses. Restrooms for all. I think that's critical. While we've had parklets and not required restaurants to comply with the California Building Code for some reason, the restaurant at least has customers while it's open and they have a restroom. This could be open at all times. There may be events and retailers are closed. Where's the overflow restrooms? Where are we going to put these things? Dining outside on the pavement. Well, we were just having a whole discussion about stormwater, fog, all of these things. Well, what's going to happen to the dining areas? How do they get cleaned? Somebody, maybe even the city, is going to come out and pressure wash. Where does it all go? Storm drain. We got to think through all these things. I mentioned at the last committee meeting, there's these phases, right? Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I encourage, don't do anything until you can do it right. If it's still going to just not look right, what are we doing? Do it well. Who's going to pay for this? I think right now it's the city. I suggest longer run. It needs to be the property owners, which would end up being retailers on the street, because this is going to be expensive. I have a million other things, but I think you really got to think through, how's it going to work? ADA access, is it public space? It is public property. I see on the plan now only 2 access points at the corners of the block. You're going to need it with curb. You're going to need some access points along the way. How's that jive with retailers? Anyway, I think I know you're not deciding today,
Sir, your time is
but a lot to be done. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Greg S., followed by Nancy C.
Good morning. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm Greg St. Clair with Avenir Restaurant Group, and we are NOLA is my restaurant. And so I've been on this street since 96, and I'm looking at this plan right now, and I'll go through mine quickly so I get it all in. The stakeholder feedback is primarily from California Avenue and University Avenue. It has no applicable application to Ramona Street. First and foremost, the orientations of our streets are totally different. So think about if you've ever been to the new Levi Stadium and how they screwed up that layout with sun. We get baking hot sun where you don't get that with the Cal Avenue nor the university setup. So, issues of sun matter, issue of natural wind quarters matter. Wet winters with this new design, it completely limits our ability to generate revenue. No electric heat. Where did that come from? Like, we passed an ordinance to ban natural gas in restaurants, and now we're saying we don't want electric heat. I bet a ton of money into putting in excellent electric heat. Propane's probably the worst thing we can possibly do. Wrought iron, these proposals, those ridiculous fabric panels, this thing would look like a junkyard within 6 months. How are you supposed to anchor a railing? All that temporary stuff has never, ever worked. So it has to be anchored into the sidewalk. My roof at NOLA, full support of the owners of the building. And it's essential, and it allows year-round dining. It's a $2 million revenue that we pulled in on that outdoor space. People want to sit outdoors, but they don't want to sit outdoors sitting in a road on a slope area. That's just, not having level platforms. When we dealt with it, we've got a gutter that deals with the storm drain runoff. Honestly, if you look at the slide of the actual design of the street, I'm not sure the pro is going to go out there. These are narrow spaces all over Palo Alto. When you narrow it down just to the storefronts, there's going to be very little activity on the street. Honestly, I just look at the thing going like, we're talking about repaving October 1st, which is probably the best month of weather that we have in the city of Palo Alto. This is just why have the street closed, in my opinion? I just don't think it makes sense. No one is going to come out with retail. They already have a hard enough time controlling theft inside their four walls or the things. No one has put anything out almost anywhere in Palo Alto. Using Iowa as an example does not sadly apply to us in California. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Nancy C., followed by Charlie W.
Good morning. Thank you.
Turn on the microphone, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here again. And I just want to support everything that Greg just said. As my neighbor, he and I basically have battled through COVID, and we are still battling and recovering our restaurants, and we spend a lot of money to do so. I would like to address his parklet is beautiful. His customers love it. He's the most vibrant location on our street, and taking that away would simply be bad for business. I also want to address the idea that the consent issue will apply again, and this in a perfect world would be great if tenants were not subject to coercion, intimidation, and threats. So it simply won't work in the case of Cuba Cafe, and if you want us to be reduced to, unfortunately, we are very narrow and long, deep. If you want us to be reduced, you'll take away the vibrancy of Ramona and Cuba. So you better think about that before moving forward. I wish you would just simply use the same rules that you approved for University Avenue and grandfather in existing restaurants so that we can continue in our quest for economic development for the city and serving our community, which is the bottom line. The emergency runway down the center of our street certainly limits the use of outdoor for any use at all because it's basically bigger than what restaurants or stores are able to use in front of their locations. So that's something else to be considered. And as far as the propositions, I think that we need to relook at all these things. There's a lot of stuff that simply doesn't work, and not all stakeholders on Ramona have been involved. So I think that there's got to be greater effort to involve everybody actively. This is a half-baked plan, and I would not like to see it go through. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Charlie W., followed by Martin B.
Good morning. Thank you. The feedback I've had over the last few weeks is what you just heard from the speakers before me, so I won't repeat that, but a few areas that I do want to focus on. And one is the project scope is to develop outdoor dining and retail standards and design and implement streetscape improvements to create a unique visitor experience. But without having year-round dining and with prohibiting the structures that would promote outdoor dining, can a plan be to create that unique visitor experience and make it a year-round experience? And as was said before me, it's difficult to have year-round with just the umbrellas alone. So that's part one. Part two is that the businesses are really concerned about the money that they have put into their current outdoor dining, and this will now have to all go away, in the end of this year and then rebuilt. So there's considerable expenses for them to go through this. And then the last piece, as was said, also the October through November period where they would be closed for outdoor dining is difficult because that's a key time. So I think how can a plan be developed that makes that unique outdoor dining experience, but year round? And then how can we work together to make sure that business is not disrupted in some of their key months? So thank you.
Our next speaker is Martin B., followed by Brenda L. Martin, you should now be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. So Ashwini is doing a really excellent job in responding to the federal guidelines for national historic districts. So sounds great. All the work that her and her group is doing. Hannah showed some photos of street sidewalk or patterns. So on Ramona Street, there are examples where some sidewalk has been replaced with new sidewalk. And I do see that the installer did use a stick to kind of scribe the same patterns that Pedro de Lemos did on some of the sidewalks. But it's almost a white concrete compared to the tan-colored original historic concrete. So will the developers of these plans specify that any replacement is to be match or at least become compatible with the historic concrete that's there? Interested to hear if there's any feedback on that. Just make that part of the specification. So when the contractor is installing it, the contractor has those instructions specified in the product that he or she or they will install. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Brenda L.
Thank you.
Hit the microphone, please.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name's Brenda, and I'm here representing Osteria Toscana as an owner. First of all, I'm very excited about all of the aesthetic improvements to keep in line with the historical nature of Ramona. I think all of us business owners on Ramona truly are on the same page there and want to honor that. There were a few concerns that were brought up that I just want to back. John was mentioning if we're going to do this right. And I'm kind of echoing that. in agreement with that, because I feel like to make another change until we really have this plan very well thought out would be a mistake. I do think that we have had one meeting, as far as I'm aware, on Ramona Street. Maybe it just would take a few more conversations to really make sure all these decisions, which they're beautiful and on paper they look great, but just making sure we execute things that really make sense for the long run. So, and also want to raise two other concerns. One, that Greg talked about the timeline. Also think October is not the best month to start this. We've waited this long. It's gone back and forth for 5 years. So why not just have a real plan with a timeline that makes sense, such as even January, where the restaurants are very slow, January, February, possibly. Or why not just wait until we really know exactly what we're doing? Because to put the restaurant owners through more changes, tearing things down, just doesn't make sense. The final concern I had was about the at-grade platforms, just thinking from a logistical standpoint. While it's certainly appreciated that it's economical to not require owners to build things, I believe I know of a few already have platforms, and just thinking through safety and thinking of actual service to these restaurants, that curb could be a real trip hazard and maybe not the safest option. So I think that should be examined and really discussed deeper, the pros and cons of having the at-grade platform or no platform. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We have one more speaker, Joseph M. 1 second. Joseph, you should now be able to unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Hi, this is Joe Martinetti. I'm with Ventana Property Services. I just want to say that we manage a number of buildings along the Ramona corridor where we're talking about this morning, and I appreciate the opportunity to give feedback to the city and city council. I would just for brevity just say I do support all the comments that John Schenk of Thorts Brothers has made this morning, and that we do encourage the city to look at the overall program in terms of how Ramona Street's going to be kept, maintained, the services that it's going to need. It's a fairly complex problem to try to maintain, cleanliness, sanity, good health, and safety for people that are walking in and out of the street. One thing in terms of replacement of sidewalks, I just want to make a comment that many of these old historical buildings allow the lower level of the building to extend out into the sidewalk area. So you have offices, you have basements, you have other service areas that are physically below the sidewalks on Ramona. In particular, I can tell you that Sweet Greens, Warby Parker, and where the old Pro was, all of those lower structures extend out to the curb line. So when we begin to talk about replacing sidewalks, I just want to caution the city that there's some awfully expensive waterproofing systems that have been recently installed in those locations. And when you begin to break up concrete, you damage the waterproofing membranes that are protecting those occupied areas below the sidewalk. So sidewalk replacement, while on surface may seem like a simple task, it is far more complicated. And I would encourage staff to basically look at all the buildings lying along Ramona to determine which one of these historical buildings do extend their lower levels out to the curb line. So thanks for the opportunity to speak.
And that concludes public comment.
Okay, thank you.
And Chair, if I could, I just would like to comment following all the series of speakers, really to express appreciation on behalf of staff for all of you coming out and sharing your thoughts with us. As Ashwini pointed out, this is clearly a work in progress, and in particular with the schedule, we'll move the schedule as necessary to get this right. Ramona is really a special place, a really unique and somewhat discreet location, such that we could have so many of the primary stakeholders actually here, and as an example, being able to get in a room and to talk through the issues. So look forward to working with all and ensuring that we get this right.
Thank you. Those very good comments. Okay, we're tight for time, so moved on, Pat here.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I have a hard stop. So I'll try to go through my questions and comments. First, on a number of the street improvements, I really think that the concepts of the stamped concrete and asphalt that would be designs that work within the historic character is really good. But from a process standpoint, I didn't see the HRB or the ARB having a role here. Why would that not be the case?
Thank you, Council Member. So for the near-term improvements, we had started out with the premise that this would be something that would be a pretty fast-moving project to get some of the improvements in. And so we're not really touching the buildings. We've kept sort of the streetscape improvements at a minimal as well. We thought that maybe for a future phase with a much broader scope, we would involve ARB, HRB, but we can take direction from this committee if it's, if there's a wish to engage them. It just adds many months to the timeline.
Yeah, I tend to think that, we're talking about near term, but if we're talking about new concrete and asphalt, whether we do or don't allow parklets, and if we did allow parklets, what would be the design requirements that would make them compatible with the historic character of the street? So I think that is important. On the parklet issue, I think that having the option for parklets is part of what contributes to the vibrancy of the street, and that's what really makes the street work, is when people go there and dine there and walk there. And so we certainly want to have that sensitivity that it be compatible with the historic character. So I think that the ARB at a minimum, and perhaps HRB as well, would be important. I do want to the parking underground parking structure. That is it's a city lot. It's not it's joint owned, but it's and yeah. And do we know what utilization there is of that structure at this time? A reason.
Don't have the information handy.
In general, our utilization's down, but on top of that, I think by virtue of this being a dead end street now, I suspect it's not being utilized much at all, and therefore we may want to look at the signage on University that make sure people know that that's there in a public structure.
It's that.
Is it? Okay, thank you for the answer. All right, that's good to know. Good. And then on the stakeholder involvement, I saw references to it, but I don't know who really attended. What portion of the attendees were from Ramona? How many were business owners, property owners, and members of the public? If you have that info, great, because a lot of this was based on that stakeholder input, and I just don't know who those participants were.
Sure, we can follow up with that info. We do have it.
Okay. And then I didn't understand the no electric. What's the rationale there? We have programs and we've had discussions about we actually want to promote the electric. For GHG reductions, not to mention that it's once they make the investment, the cost effectiveness of the heating is far better.
So, Councilmember, because we're not envisioning structures like roofs and sidewalls and, just structures, and then we don't really allow for electrical to be routed under sidewalks. It would be hard. I mean, we can look at different options, but it's hard to get the electrical connections over to where the dining areas are. So that's something we would have to look at if we're doing structures. If at this point we weren't envisioning that.
Okay, so one, I'm strongly inclined to allowing structures. I don't know why we would carve out this street and say it's the only one that wouldn't allow parklet structures. We certainly want once again, to have them well-designed, compatible. I would imagine that, we've had the Old Pro closed, but they're going to be reopening. I don't know whether they do or don't have plans or anticipation of having outdoor dining, and whether that be a structure, but I think we do want to allow that, and we do want to not only allow electric, we want to encourage electric, the opposite. And then on the adjacent storefronts, we remind me on University or what we established as the agreement. And I'll just add that even on University, there were the arguments by adjacent businesses against allowing dining there, which we don't allow a parklet in front, just low profile umbrellas or whatever, were that they objected to the loss of a parking spot in front of their business. That doesn't apply here. And they objected to the perception that it would obstruct visibility from cars driving by, which is not the case here either. So if anything, on this street, those reasons to be more concerned about allowing spillover of dining in front of other businesses that are not seeking that. I think we had said there's a preference if you have a restaurant next door, then that restaurant has the first rights to dining in front of their restaurant. But if it's a retail establishment next door, I think we want to embrace and encourage that outdoor dining to that degree. It is what is making the street vibrant more than anything else. It's not vibrant when it's just I'll just leave it at that. And we also, the other reason for the parklets is we really want to encourage year-round vibrancy. And that's an important component of year-round vibrancy. So those are my comments, and thank you.
Good. Julie?
Thank you. Given our conversation last night at council, last meeting of the fiscal year, talking about Cal Ave and the value of permanent structures, it's hard to understand how that conversation is in dialogue with this conversation, or that street, another closed off street, is in dialogue with this street. And I just feel like we have some left hand, right hand, and timing issues, and hope that we will find ourselves making decisions that at a high level are consistent. I think, for example, this issue of non-electric, as has already been stated, we attempted to ban gas in restaurants. We've had to roll that back because of legal issues, but we still know that that's ultimately where we need to be headed. So why would we deliberately put a system intended to be in place for many, many years that requires propane instead of electric? So I think we've just got to be thinking at that bigger picture, longer term level when we're trying to figure out what to do. This historic street has to make its way all the way into the future we envision, and that is sustainable. So I think those, other than, I agree with many of the concerns that have already been raised. So I think, I will double down on the importance of involving the HRB and or the ARB. If we're not involving them in this conversation about what a historic district should look like into the future, I'm not sure what we involve them on. It feels that important. And I, tend to be one who wants to not have processes, drag us down. But this strikes me as something we do need to slow down in order to really have confidence that we've gotten it right. I agree with the concern about the activation, play, interactive art performances, retail pop-up feel exciting and delightful, but very secondary to do the tenants, do the businesses, do the restaurants. Are they getting what they need in order to be able to draw the people there? Because if the people aren't going to be drawn to a play area, they're going to be drawn to a great dining experience. And then secondarily, what can we do once we're there or while we're waiting or after the fact? That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I echo both my colleagues and the public speakers. I thought brought up very good points. ARB, HRB, I think this is in there. This is what they're made for. So I think we should incorporate their wisdom. Permanent structures, I agree. They add to vibrancy. I think there's no reason to outlaw them. I think they need to be historic and be consistent, and that's where HRB and ARB will come in play. But I think we need to give more flexibility to the merchants, both in design, run them, if they have a design that they like and run it through ARB, I think that's going to be better than us telling them what to do. Also, from a schedule standpoint, this is a long process. Why are we rushing? I'd rather have them take their time, do it right, than rush something suboptimal through. I don't understand no platform. If they want to not have a platform, that's fine. But I think platforms have a lot of ability. It makes there's a lot of functionality it adds, and also accessibility it adds. I also question required planters. I maybe encourage planters, but if planters are not maintained, they do not look good. And so I don't think we should force people to have planters if they don't want it. No electric heaters. I think that's a bad idea. We want electricity out there. And on Cal Ave, it's required. And here we're saying you can't have it, which I don't understand. And consent requirements, I agree with Pat about that. It should be the same as on university. I don't think we should be changing rules back and forth unless there's a good reason. So I think the status quo should be what we have right now. And I think that's all. Okay.
Can I just add,
Yeah.
I neglected to mention that I concur on the platforms, and what was the other one?
Electricity and consent, lighting and electricity, electric heaters.
There was one other thing. Anyway, good comments.
Okay. Does the staff have any comments or?
Just once again, thank you for the feedback. Again, this is a process, and appreciate this important step. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming out. We appreciate the public comment. It's very useful.